Okay, we are starting the Garage Strength Podcast here with sports scientist Dr. Kristof Kipp. How many tabs do you have open on your laptop right now?
Right now, only 3, but that's because I'm traveling here with you in Spain, Leon, España.
So you really only have 3 tabs?
Right now, yeah, because I'm a little bit more focused on work. And
are they all work related?
I think so. Again, I have more tabs open on my phone because it's easier to check, social media. Got to get my Wordle in.
That's good.
I got to share that with it. It's a family thing we typically do in the mornings.
100%.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so Kristof is a sports scientist that analyzes, I would argue, like the most explosive athletes in the world. We've talked to him before. The weekend that Mikolos Alekna actually broke the world record, and I wanted to ask some questions about throwing, but mainly ask questions around strength, speed, explosiveness. What does that even mean? And then my biggest question right off the bat was going to be, Kristof, you've looked at world record holders, you've looked at Olympic champions in multiple different events, multiple different sports. We're here at the Junior World Championships in Leon, Spain, and I want to see, what do you tend to see in this broad spectrum when you're looking at an Olympic champion or you're looking at a world record holder, both? What tends to be some of the similarities that you'll see across the board?
So I think here, so we're at the weightlifting Junior World Championships, and I'm always surprised at the variety of body anthropometrics that some of the athletes come in with, right? Mm-hmm. You obviously have weight classes in weightlifting, but even within weight classes, especially at the junior level, there's just such a variety of builds. I mean, you're familiar with Ryan McDonald, right? Who's a pretty lanky kid for the weight category that he's in. So in this sense, pretty surprised by just the range of anthropometrics and body shapes and sizes that we have in the sport.
What did you think? Did you get to watch the 55? The girl from Taiwan?
Yes, super impressive, right?
So one of the things that I was thinking about, one of the things, I don't think she has as shorter legs as people think she does. I was actually looking at her, I'm like, she's actually like pretty, like equally spread out body type wise.
On first look, I didn't notice that. It seems like she has a longer torso.
Yeah, a little bit longer, but not.
But again, most of the time when I'm in competition, I'm clicking on start, stop, start, stop, so I don't have the ability to really focus in on exactly what they're doing.
Did you take measurements of her?
Well, so I'm here recording video of all the sessions that we have U.S. lifters in. Yeah. And that was a 55A for the women lifters yesterday, right? Yeah. So we're on the Ulrich in that session. So recording that, and then we're gonna have some colleagues here, Marco Soriano from Spain, who works with Hawken Dynamics, and they're doing some force plate testing. Okay. And so hopefully they got her on the force plates to do some iso pulls and some jumping.
So if you see, let's say there's an Olympic champion in weightlifting, for example. I was even going to ask you, because you have done pseudo force plate testing with Jaime, and you've looked at some of her capabilities. When you see these athletes, let's say jump or do a snatch or do a clean or do a squat or do a pull, is there, like, the best of the best, is there any consistency that you would see from one group? Let's say it's totally using Jaime as an example, as a world champion, Olympic bronze medalist in the discus, and then comparing her to a weightlifter of equal stature. Is there consistency or of any movement patterns that you tend to see?
Some, yes. So I think even within each respective sport, within a weight category, however you want to do the matching, right? If you have, you can still have, I think, 2 lifters who lift at very similar weights, but are exhibit different mechanical characteristics and how they apply force to the bar, how they speed up the bar, turnover, etc. So I think there are certainly still distinct groups within each. That said, I do think you can have similar types of athletes that then go into different sports, right? So again, one thing that sticks out with Jaime, where we did the in-shoe pressure testing during the throws, we also did a vertical jump test with her to just get an idea of what is she capable of producing. And it sticks with me because you said afterwards that she didn't even really try during the counter movement jump.
Yeah, she was
maybe a little bit annoyed with you for some reason.
She was annoyed because she said that it felt weird in her shoes. And she was like, she does this thing with me where she'll just be like, and she'll like almost hit me in the face, and then basically tells me I'm crazy. Like, Eres loco, you're crazy.
So the thing was that when we looked at the force production profile during her counter movement jumps, where she sort of did this lackadaisical unweighing, gets to the bottom, and then her force just shoots up, and she's like almost holds steady at three times body weight force, which is pretty rare. And then so it just jumps up, she holds that, and then it drops off. So her ability to sort of drop into a squat, turn things on, and just produce force, right? It's pretty remarkable. And we have that in some weightlifters too. That's all I was going to say.
Okay, so this leads into some of the questions that I really wanted to ask you about this. Was I wanted to know, okay, I'm trying to think through this, is like if you go and look at Jaime, let's use the example, she's got 3x body weight out of the counter movement. You had mentioned to me, and maybe you could talk about this, when you receive a clean, let's just say there's 200 kilos on the bar. If there's 200 kilos on the bar, in most cases when they receive the clean, when the athlete receives the clean, that will turn into 400 kilos of force that they have to apply back into the bar.
So you want me to do the back of the napkin math of that?
Well, yes, I guess so. Is there a correlation then that you would see? Is somebody of Jaime's capability, if she's got that 3x body weight, and that was around what she weighed, around 88 to 90 kilos probably. You know, is there correlations that you see then that you're like, okay, they can jump at 3x body weight, like they might be a good weightlifter or not, you know?
Yeah, so I think it becomes an interesting sort of performance analysis problem, or like a talent identification problem, or project almost, right? Because if you know how much force you can produce during a counter movement jump, you can calculate how much impulse a person needs to produce to generate that based on their body weight. And so perhaps you could then calculate out and saying, instead of generating that momentum and using it to generate 2 to 3 meters per second of vertical velocity to jump high, maybe we can take some of that mass, put it on a bar, and we only need to generate 1.5 meters per second. So half somebody's vertical jump velocity and turn that into like a clean, second pull clean velocity.
Okay.
So it's sort of interesting thought experiments, right? In terms of what would a vertical jump force production number turn into in terms of a pulling number?
This whole thing that's interesting is like thinking about Jaime's lifting is she is so good from a hang. And like, would those numbers from her hang position be outrageously different from a weightlifting world champion or whatever? Like that's what I was just thinking. Like, will you see that throwers are like
Yeah, so there's certainly, I think, within the weightlifting world, we have people who hang their hat on ratios, right? That if you can hang clean a certain amount or power clean, all right, it should translate into this. And so you have that for specific exercises or for strength-based exercises. You front squat this amount, and you have these sort of ratios and conversions. I do wonder, like for throwers, because we typically see throwers probably utilize more lifts from the hang. And it might be due to just joint specificity that you don't really get into a low squat position. Right. Depending on sort of your technique in the.
But even still, even athletes that get into a low squat position, like as a a pretty high level throws coach, even the athletes who will get down into that low squat position, they're exiting the back of the circle at a quarter squat position most of the time. Like I very rarely, outside of like Andy Bloom, I don't know if I've ever seen someone squat down and stay down.
Yeah. So the point being that, so if you come out of the back of the circle in a quarter squat, then where would you train, right? Or where do you spend most of your time training?
But that would also be arguing that there's like that joint angle specificity. Like how long does that need to be trained? The joint angle specificity. Like are we arguing that training full range of motion wouldn't have a carryover to a quarter squat?
I don't think we're arguing against the general transfer of strength, right? So yeah, I think so certainly, I mean, like deep squats.
Here's my argument on this, okay? You get a weightlifter that squats ass to grass all the time, and then you see their quarter squat capability on a jerk. Mm-hmm. You see the way that they can do a counter movement. Now I know it's a skilled position for them, and they do it on a regular basis, but they're never really doing quarter squats, but they have the ability to transfer that from a full range of motion. Now, I'm not saying that we should, as throwers, never do quarter squats.
The more weightlifting research we do, the more proponent I've sort of become, or turning into proponent of jerk dips, jerk drives.
Really?
Because it's more similar to the quarter squat, right? Okay. So you're not quarter back squatting, it's almost like you're doing a quarter front squat maybe, but doing it more specific to the jerk.
So you believe that there is a higher correlation of joint specificity, joint angle specificity?
I think that's a general thing, yeah, I would say. I mean, I think it depends on, specificity, yes. We want carryover, we want transfer.
So I've got to think about this, because for me personally, my personal take is that like probably 30% of my program would be joint specific, like meaning take a thrower in a whole year, only 30% of their squats are going to be quarter squats. And it's almost always within like the last 12 weeks of peaking, like leading into the comps.
That makes sense, right? From a basic sort of traditional periodization perspective, you get more specific as you go on. I mean, one thing, just going back to like deep squats, right? I think you would find support in the literature for deep squats being really good at stimulating hypertrophy and helping just with overall general maximal strength, because you get into really mechanically disadvantaged positions. Yep. Moment arms get really large, so your muscles have to create a large amount of force
to get out of that.
So there's certainly a place for them, and depending on, I think, the type of capacity that you're trying to build.
Because then you're looking at the dip of the jerk, and you're looking at that dip, and the dip is going to be done at if we're doing like, let's say you have an athlete, I'm thinking about Jake actually, because we did jerk dips with him, and we did it twice, and both times he blacked out so hard he fell over the bar.
I'm not laughing at Jake.
No, you should feel free to laugh at him. And we have scoops, so I always like doing it in the scoops because it would show like a vertical dip and move up. My question would then be, if there's this, let's just say a joint specificity carryover, which there is to a point, right? Like I would say, with reason. Now I'm going to question myself a little bit further based off of what your stance is. But then speed specificity, what do you see? Okay, you take this jerk dip, this athlete doing a quarter squat from a front rack, but the speed's pretty different.
I guess I'd ask you for a little bit more detail. What's the
velocity
sort of,
might only be at,
or the load, even like what would you use as overload for those exercises?
Let's say that it's at
10% over
120%, because you might only see 0.5 to 0.8 meters per second movement. Now it might be a little bit faster because you are in a strong position, but it's not going to be much faster relative to what's the speed of the take Ryan or Haley, what's the speed of their vertical force of the bar? What's the speed of the bar when they're finishing a jerk? 1.5.
Yeah, 1.5. Yeah, 1.5 to 1.8 maybe.
Okay. 1.5 to 1.8. Okay. So similar to like what you would have a successful snatcher, successful snatch at, well, higher than 1.5, but.
Yeah, so I mean, lifter specific for sure.
And that would be meters per second.
I guess again, I would come back to, it's never just one load or one percentage for the entire duration of the program.
Yeah.
Or that you would systematically vary those programming variables to achieve the ends that you want. Right, so if you, I guess, and based on whether you feel that they need to work on their jerk, right? If the jerk is not the problem, then doing those jerk drives is probably not an issue. The reason I just said that to begin with is that, I mean, most of the research just the data that we're looking at is where we're finding, right, that the drive phase of the jerk is just so important to give it the velocity needed to turn, or not to turn over the bar, but to get under the bar. Right, if you reach peak velocity at the end of the drive phase.
So you're driving, you reach peak velocity.
Like some people, when the bar is still on the shoulders.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not really, so as soon as the bar separates from the shoulders, for some you've reached peak velocity.
Okay.
So, right, if you're trying to generate greater velocity, one easy way is just you gotta drive harder. Right, and so whether then that's an issue of you gotta be able to create greater eccentric forces, get through the transition phase from eccentric to concentric without any loss in force.
Okay, so at the bottom of the dip, what is the force going to look like relative to body weight, or to the bar, the weight on the bar?
So typically two types of lifters, and most of the data we look at, some people have a two-peak force profile, some will have a one-peak force profile, and if they have a double peak, the overall average force is typically smaller as a percentage of bar load. If it's a single peak, it's typically, so if it's a single peak, we can see up to 250% of bar load. So if you're
250%.
Yes. So if you're cleaning and jerking.
Can we restate this? If you've got 200 kilos on the bar, and you dip, and you're an effective lifter, you might have somebody who has 250% of that.
Of that
load.
Force that you're driving up with. If you're a lifter who, again, if your style of lifting leads you to produce a single peak in force.
So you're looking at 500 kilos potentially out of the bottom of the dip of a jerk.
Yeah.
And at what speed?
So the downward speed, right? We typically see like 1 meters per second, or up to about 1 meters per second, give or take, during the dip phase, and then drive phase 1.5. Say 1.5 probably as an average.
Do you see people that have that high of a transfer in the dip of the jerk? Do you see them having higher vertical jumps?
I don't think we've looked at that specifically. It's something that we've sort of started to notice a little bit, because when we make specific plots of the data where we look at these force displacement curves, when we look at what's the range of motion that you go through during the dip on the downward phase, how are you producing force, right? We look at the stiffness that you're creating. We also look at then the force that you're producing against the velocity. And so it's that force and velocity component, so let's say quote unquote power perhaps.
I should have asked you to define power and impulse.
No, we already did a podcast on that. I'm going to cite myself and say, see the last podcast.
Go click on this podcast to understand impulse versus power.
Insert link right here.
As I was cutting you off from you explaining, I guess
I don't, but I'll just say, so again, with people, some people will exhibit two peaks in the force profile, and that will be below 200%. And so it might be a capacity, so I'm not saying everybody will be at that level.
Right.
It will vary from lifter to lifter.
So this is like the big question that I've had is like, you take someone, you take, and I think about Alekna, Jaime I think about a lot, Alex, Rose, my discus throwers I have, but what makes their nervous system so effective at recruitment and coordination and like sequencing of movement, is there like something that and like I've read, I read this book called The Talent Code, and they talk about myelin sheathing and how well that can increase
nerve conduction velocity, rate coding of motor units, yes.
Right,
yeah.
and like that can lead to a higher twitch force or whatever. Bullshit terms you
motor
guys,
unit stuff.
Blah, 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 whatever you guys use, smart people terms. What is it that like separates them from like, the number 10 person in the world? I'm even thinking about someone like Olivia, who's just like, you can just see how well she is connected to the bar and how much awareness she has.
Yeah.
And how stable it is. What is it that creates that stability?
I think that's a super interesting question, and I'm going to take the cheap way out. I had a conversation with somebody about sort of neuromuscular characteristics in elite level athletes, and this person said, apologize, I can't remember who, but they just said, we don't really have the tools to get at that point yet, right? We use electromyography to sort of look at what the sort of sum of action potentials are doing underneath the sort of recording area.
Okay.
We have some multi-unit EMG arrays. They said perhaps we just don't have the technology yet to be able to really tease out those differences of the neuromuscular system, especially during the event itself, right? It's one thing doing a counter movement jump in a lab or
but then dialing in
instrumenting
during the competition and
It's just, dialing in I think that expression is almost like, it's one of the reasons that I'm here, right? It's like we do testing in the lab, but we record sort of bar path, bar trajectory, force velocity profiles, but then the question is like, what happens in competition? Is it that similar? Even if people are lifting at 95% in a very controlled environment, even if it's close to their 1RM, you're probably dialing up something.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah, that's like, it's something that I've often thought has an interesting correlation. Okay, I wanted to go back to, what do you see about in a clean, like in a full clean? Have you researched, any of the fatigue from that, like on a day-to-day basis where you've been able to measure someone like day 1, day 3, day 5 of a week or something? But also like, you're taking on that 200, or you're taking on 200% of the load of the bar. Do you see that, like I was even just thinking about, like you have somebody do like a double leg bound, like, and land and go on the double leg bound. Is there any correlation to things like that can transfer, I'm trying to think about the realm of weightlifting and bridging this over to like the realm of sports performance. Yeah.
So I guess your first question, we have done very little serial testing within, like on the scale of multiple days. Right? We've had some training camps at Marquette for USA weightlifting, and that's typically on the range of 8 months for the first one, then maybe a year for the second one. So in terms of cumulative fatigue, we don't really have that data.
Yeah.
Again, it would be, I think, very interesting and useful, right, to actually see what. To repeatedly do the measurements that we do and overlay them with your programming, right? To see if there are correlations or we call those like cross-correlation lags, and what happens to your fluctuations in volume and intensity, and how does that relate to changes in bar velocities as an example. And I know that there's one study out there that has looked at this and certainly found that, right, that in elite level weightlifters, there's a case study of two German national team members that fluctuations in volume and intensity over the course of, from like the scale of week to week and month to month, that those correlate with changes in sort of load velocity profiling based measures like peak isometric force or unloaded shortening velocity. But I don't know where you want to, in terms of carryover to other athletic performance.
Well, I was just even thinking about before with like range of motion that you see too. Like, is there a range of motion that is seen in weightlifting movements that in turn lead to positive carryovers that are attributes that you see in sports performance?
I guess the example that you gave of if we have a clean, you have to catch super low, like if you're doing full cleans, you're catching them really in a really deep squat, and you have other jumping tasks that you have to go through a significant range of motion. I guess the nice thing about weightlifting movements, you go through full range of motion, especially with the lower extremity.
Yeah.
So you are training the full range of motion. So the likelihood that you'll be more prepared to produce force effectively in other sports that might not require you to go into a full squat, but you're still strong through pretty much most of that range of motion.
Right. Okay.
So that's probably why you have some carryover from weightlifting to other sports where even though you say like, we don't do full squats, I don't go up for a rebound in basketball and like ass to gas first.
And
jump
for a
up,
full
right?
counter movement.
So,
right. That's another question there. Right there is like, so you have a tall lifter and you do a hang or you do like a 2-box like from above the knee.
Yeah.
Like, does that correlate to, does a high hang snatch correlate to a better vertical jump or something? Like, that's the interesting thing that I feel like we're still like researching, like, does single leg bicep or does single leg curl lead to better hamstring hypertrophy than bilateral leg curls, instead of looking at like things that actually matter? Like, can we look at like, does a hang snatch improve a vertical jump over a 6-week or an 8-week time frame? Like, or does the counter movement, or like, that's the other thing. Is there a range of motion correlation to stiffness on the dip of a jerk that is also found in the grounding phase of a vertical jump or during the amortization phase or whatever, like on a hurdle hop progression or something? That's like the stuff that I'm interested in, that I'm wondering, like, is it because there's a lack of that research that there's still people like concerned about doing traditional weightlifting movements?
I think those are still like valid.
They're valid for recovery, I think, for sure, for injury prevention and for recovery, like return to play. Yeah. But my frustration,
I get what you mean, that you want something that's more applied, immediately applicable to what you do.
Look, let's get 30 basketball players, teach them in 3 sessions how to do a high hang snatch.
Yeah.
Test them on their vertical.
Okay, so I'll give a. I had a conversation with Will Fleming.
Okay.
The other day, you know that guy.
Yeah.
He actually had this idea about a training study, which are really hard to do in weightlifting, right? Because you need subjects, access to subjects.
I know where he's going with this one. Is he going to the warm-up area?
No.
Okay, sorry.
But this is, it's almost like if you need a larger pool of weightlifters, right, offering or getting people to do remote training.
Yeah.
Or thinking about whether we can use remote training to leverage larger sample sizes, getting people to agree to perform a specific resistance training protocol, like to focus on a specific exercise, or add in a specific variation of an exercise. And then with some of the technology that we now have, right, if they were to record themselves pre or post, analyze their video, sort of similar to what we do here in competition.
Okay.
It would be a way to almost like crowdsource research in weightlifting, which is sort of an interesting idea.
I don't think it would ever pass like a peer-reviewed.
Oh, I think that's a whole nother. I won't say that's a whole nother question. I think you definitely have to think about the best way to do it, and you'd have to look at adherence, like how, because everything would be self-reported. You're right.
Yeah. I think that would be a great study. I think the issue I see with sports science is like, I see so many issues actually, but it's like,
let me have them.
Okay, so there's on the bodybuilding sense, I love the studies of like activation of the like specific muscles at certain ranges at certain points, and what leads to, if volume's equated, almost always if volume's equated, more volume equals better, like more hypertrophy. I like that some of the recent papers or studies that I've been reading about with like looking at the semitendinosus versus the biceps femoris, where are most of the hamstring injuries? What are the angles that we can train the specific hamstring muscle to prevent theoretical or potential
hamstring
injuries? Yeah, and then relating that also to like positions on sprinting patterns. Like, okay, I'll get off a little task here quick. Is like you do a razor curl or you do a Nordic curl. It's almost all biceps femoris. You do a hip glider, a hamstring glider exercise, which I had never seen before. But you do Nordic curls with these hamstring gliders to strengthen your semitendinosus, and then that mimics the position that people get in when they injure themselves when they're sprinting at full speed. But you have knee flexion and hip extension that you're training the hamstrings at. Now all of a sudden it decreases the injuries that you have when your body's got too much hip flexion when you're sprinting during the drive phase, which is where most, like 95% of the hamstring injuries come from. That's stuff that I think is applicable. I know that was a little, but the shit that pisses me off is that we'll have this discussion about like, should we even be front squatting? Should we even be, should we be doing more isometric work or whatever it is? And we spend all this time and then the isometric studies say this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, dude, I don't care what they say because we're still not looking at, can a high hang snatch improve somebody's vertical jump if they do it for 8 weeks straight and they do it twice a week for 15 to 20 reps each session?
You mean a high hang snatch versus something else?
Yeah, versus whatever. Yeah. Let's have them do 2 lifts as a session, and they do it twice a week for 8 weeks. I want to see the result. Like I want to see, because if I'm going to spend all this time doing all these other exercises when I could just do 2 movements on a freaking guy who's 6'7", who's a basketball player. They're really tall. It's hard for them to lift like this. All right, well let's just do high hang snatches and front squats to the box for 8 weeks straight. I guarantee you they're going to have a higher vertical. Now, I can say that, but I can't say it with
but you want to know, like, is there something, do I get more bang for my buck from something else?
Yeah.
Right. Is it a high hang or hang snatch or hang clean? Right. Or hang power snatch, hang power clean. Like some of your go-tos, like which one should you choose?
Yeah, and I guess where my frustration too is like, there hasn't become a clear differentiator between like, this researcher is like explosiveness based or power impulse based. This researcher is max strength. This researcher is...
You mean athletes or researchers? I mean, I like to think of my research sorry. You meant an athlete who is...
No, I meant researchers.
Like, okay, so
I think,
tell me more. What do you mean?
Okay, so I think that research should be divvied up where it's like, I'm in the explosive realm of, like, to me, okay, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but like, I don't know, DePina to me became like the high jump guru. Yes. Okay, he did so, and like, I think you're going to become that version in weightlifting. But I think there needs to be, from your entire field, this is the sprint group researchers that we have. These are the endurance researchers that we have. These are and maybe that does exist, I don't know. These are the max strength researchers that we have. These are the return to play injury researchers that we have. Does that happen?
Yeah, I think that does exist.
It's just not as...
Well, maybe, I guess, because if you name those specific areas, like they're names that come to mind based on readings that we reading assignments that we give our graduate students, right? When we talk about,
you can see a consistent theme on this researcher.
Yeah, and I think in academia you typically ask like, what is your research agenda, or what is the main area of your research based on? But I think this sort of points to something that I know we've talked about before, is this often a disconnect between academia and sort of, not necessarily the real world, but academia maybe applying some of the research that we do, or helping translate that to coaches and athletes like yourself, right? Yeah. And I mean, this discussion about the discus report that we did, right? Just saying that really, I don't know if, I think part of that would probably we would be able to take some of that and publish it in a research journal, but really the major benefit would just be trying to get it out to coaches.
Yeah.
And then sort of the question becomes like, what's the best avenue to try to get that out to coaches? So I think that's still, right, I think conversations to be had or things to be thought about, like what are the best ways to share some of that? And part of that is why I agreed to sit down with you and do these podcasts.
Because of that.
Yeah.
No, and I appreciate that quite a bit. I'm trying to think I was even just thinking about Marquette. Like, does Marquette come to you ever and say like, hey, our basketball players, we got to get them like a little bit bigger, a little bit more explosive. We got to get them to dominate on the boards or whatever. Like, do you ever work with them at all? Or the strength coaches maybe?
Yeah, it's never like the head coach comes up and it's like, Kristof. But I mean, pretty much within the first year of me taking that job at Marquette, and I reached out to Todd Smith, who's the head of sports performance at Marquette. He's also the head strength coach for men's basketball. And I think it was just through a mutual connection, a friend of mine said, hey, you should talk to Todd, right, and see if you guys can help each other out. And I mean, for the better part of a decade, before we started doing more weightlifting work and throwing work, before I was fortunate enough to step back into that realm of things, we spent a lot of time working with our sports performance team at Marquette, doing jump testing, sort of one-off motion capture or biomechanics testing if Todd had specific questions. Right, we would do, depending on what the question was, we would do either very basic jump testing. Can we just do force plate profiling for some of the men's basketball team? Can we follow them throughout the season to look if there are changes in vertical jump performance? So again, back to that cumulative fatigue idea.
Yeah.
One year we did serial ultrasounds, which is pretty cool. Ultrasounds of the the patella tendons to look at tendon health.
Okay.
Trying to overlay that throughout the year. Trying to overlay that with sort of player load information, so player load that we get from catapult sensors to quantify their overall movement, like the volume of movements that they do. And so, yeah, unfortunately, a large part of that research also does not go anywhere because it's sort of in-house, they're one-offs.
Yeah, so it's harder to,
Small sample sizes, which some journals might not be that interested in. So
I was even just thinking when you were describing that, I'm like, okay, let's say you take these basketball players and you go, all right, let's do a squat, a back squat or a front squat or a single leg squat to a box or whatever. Not the single leg, but the other ones to a box. If they're over 6'5", this is the depth that they travel. You get 10 to 12 weeks. You test their, let's say a snatch or a hang clean or something. And then you're testing their ability to land and jump back up and like get to the rim on a rebound of some sort. If one of these things goes up, does that reaction time decrease and their ability to jump higher increase? And it's like, maybe that's my dream of what I would want to see is like, I was even thinking about this like back in the day when we grew up, Husker Power was big and they did hang cleans and all this crazy stuff and probably a lot of drugs too. But like, if you took a football team and you tested like what is their front squat, what's their clean or their snatch, and then you had them hit, and I'm bringing this up because I mentioned to you earlier about how I have this anecdotal evidence that like the guys that have the best jerks or behind the neck jerks or the best cleans in my gym are also known as the guys that can hit the hardest.
They can tackle hard,
Yeah, so I want to see like if that's accurate, if you can measure when they hit like a sled.
No, I thought you were going to say we put an accelerometer into the other guy's helmet and see
that might actually be what we need to change the actual the entire game. We might need to see that. I was thinking about just going into a sled, and it's like stuff like that. That's where I want to see like, okay, does something like does the information that you have with Olivia or Jaime or Haley, my lifters and stuff that you've tested, Jake, can that bridge over into those examples, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea of us doing specific performance tests, looking at either like neuromuscular capacity or maximal pulling strength, right? And even some measures from vertical jump performance and seeing how that correlates to specific aspects of their lifting performance. Again, I think that's the exciting thing about what we're doing here. We're getting pure sort of performance data or data on what a person does in competition, being able to characterize their force application on the barbell. And then hopefully we have enough people who participate in the iso pull testing that we do here, right? So iso pull from the floor and at mid-thigh. So you're looking at sort of specific ranges of motion. And it's not, I'm getting pedantic here, but it's not a specific points of motion because it's not a range, right? At those points, at the starting position and at sort of in your power position, does whatever force you're able to produce sort of correlate with the forces that somebody produces at liftoff or in the power position.
Right.
Because we were looking at some data earlier, right, where people have very distinct force application profiles on the barbell, and that might be able to then inform you, right, do we need to spend more time on pulling strength in the first pull or second pull? And then we also have the vertical jump data.
Yeah.
And we have the squat jump or the deep squat jump. And I will share this because they posted it to Instagram already, but we had Gabe Chum do a vertical jump, kind of movement jump, 71 centimeters, which is one of the highest vertical jumps I've ever seen. But probably most impressive was they did a deep squat jump, which is
71 centimeters would be like from a full squat.
No, it was a kind of movement jump. So hands on hips, down and up, 71 centimeters.
No arms.
No arms.
Holy crap.
But then the other one was a deep squat jump. The deep squat jump is you go into the like astrogast bottom position,
motion,
and you just go purely vertical, and you jump 68 centimeters.
Holy! So he has a pretty
close ratio. Yeah. And so again, as a weightlifter, right, you would expect that you have to be able to turn it on from that squat position.
Yeah. And clearly from a quarter squat too, because of doing jerks.
Yes. Yeah. And so I don't think I ever finished this thought earlier, but when we look at some of the data, it's sort of interesting because we notice similarities in the overall ground reaction force pattern for kind of movement jumps and the jerk. And so that comes back to almost the original question that you had about kind of movement jump transferring over into weightlifting.
Yeah.
Right, that maybe we can use or come up with a back of the envelope calculation of trying to predict if your kind of movement jump, like if a jerk style kind of movement jump could tell us something about your ability to produce force during the jerk, or maybe what would be your top end momentum that you can generate during a jerk. What's the maximum velocity you could generate? Because it's momentum during the kind of movement jump or during the jerk jump. I guess I just made that up. Or during the actual jerk.
Right.
So you're trying to match for positions
to see
for velocities, right? And one, you're jumping. You're obviously going to take all that momentum you can generate.
And when you're just doing like an actual weighted counter movement with the dip and drop. Yeah.
So maybe a crazy idea, but I think it would be fun to try out.
Okay, so with all this information, I've got a couple questions, and you sort of triggered me on this. around closing out the podcast. You get athletes. You get two things to improve. You're telling an athlete right now, like you've been around, you've watched world records go down. You've been around Olympic medalists, Olympic champions, the strongest, most explosive freak athletes on the planet. They got two things to work on to improve. Somebody's a normal human being, like, and they come to you and they say, "What? I got two things, Kristof. What should I work on if I want to become the most explosive athlete on the planet?"
And you don't want my "it depends" answer.
yeah, I don't want that.
You know what? I think a slightly different answer. I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but more and more what I hear from people is just consistency.
Yeah.
Right? Consistency, not getting hurt, continuously training for long periods of time, and taking advantage of incremental gains. I mean, is that fair enough?
I want two specific movements.
Two specific movements, okay.
Yeah. I like that answer. That answer's I'm good with.
Okay.
But I want two movements, so maybe we'll have another. This is the second part.
Okay, so I don't lift as much as I used to. I run mostly now. way too much lifting when I was younger, and now I need to make sure my cardiovascular system is in good health.
Yeah.
But when I do lift, I love hang power cleans. That's the meathead that's sort of tucked away back here still, hang power cleans.
That goes back to the Husker Power days.
Probably. I was inculcated at a very young age. I mean, in terms of like explosiveness, force, like producing a lot of force, quick amount of time, whole body motion, eccentric, concentric, force absorption.
Yeah.
So you buy that.
Power. Yeah.
You approve.
That brings up one thing quick. Tell me, I wanted to ask this about the catch, the turnover on the snatch versus the clean. What do you see as big differences there? Because we talked about how you get 2 times load of force put into the bar on a clean.
Yeah.
What does the turnover look like to get into that safe catch position?
So we define the turnover phase as going from peak vertical velocity at end of second pull. So velocity goes up to peak minimum velocity or peak crash velocity, right, when the bar comes down on you. In general, we see that the turnover times are smaller for the snatch than for the clean, which sort of means that the velocity that the bar gains as it comes down on you is faster in the clean. Right? So in the clean, we've seen up to 2 meters per second. The bar crashing on you. For the snatch, it's typically under 1 meter per second. And so in the clean, larger downward velocity. You also go through larger range of motion.
What is the load you see on the snatch relative to the bar?
I think there's more variability, and certainly, part of why you get large forces in the clean is it's a heavier load and you get bar bending. All right, so which still means that the bar bends, so it creates a force, but you still have to counter that force, right?
Yeah.
But it's not, maybe it's a faster applied force, more dynamic than in the snatch. But in the snatch, up to still 150% of bar load.
150%.
But which is what you apply during the second pull, right? Or what some people, right? Because you obviously, bar load, if you only, bar load means the bar is moving. Once you're at 1% over, it means that you're applying sufficient force for the bar to go up.
Fair, okay.
So in the snatch, it's probably more equal, but then considerations are in the snatch, it's here, right? It's 150% that has to go through your shoulders, trying to stabilize that. But so and in the clean, typically larger velocities, larger range of motion, these forces that are, bar forces that are up to 2 times double the bar load, essentially.
Yeah.
And then, based on the ground reaction forces, it's then you still have system weight, right? So the overall ground reaction force as a percent of system weight can be even larger.
What's the ground reaction force that you would see put into the ground of how would you determine that? Like if you have a 200K clean and they catch it and they're, let's just using what your example is, they have a 400K force back into the bar. What do you see into the ground reaction?
So it's just because when we analyze the ground reaction forces during weightlifting exercises, we analyze them just raw, so in terms of newtons and overall time, but we also analyze them in regards to system weight. System weight means it's the barbell plus your body weight.
Okay.
So we're normalizing for the load that's on the bar and
Your
weight class, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost a nice way to think of it as a technique indicator, because ideally it stays constant, I guess, and any variation then means that people are using different techniques. But they can be during a clean, you can have double system weight ground reaction forces. So it's your body weight plus the bar load, twice that. Which again comes pretty close to the bar load, doubling the bar load.
So if you have let's say a 96, you're looking at a 96 cleans 200, then they have a 400K plus another 100K, 500 plus.
Carry the one, something like that.
Yeah, so you'd be like, I'm just thinking back to body weight originally, so almost 4 to 5 times, possibly.
Yeah.
Depending on the load on the bar. Okay, when was the last time you bought a car?
The last time, 3 or 4 years ago. So my wife does the car buying in the,
See, I
in the
can see you
family.
buying a Toyota Corolla in like 2001 and just driving,
driving
it and just driving it constantly.
If I weren't living in Wisconsin, where having like all-wheel or four-wheel drive in the winters is beneficial, and I have a teenage daughter and that plays sports and having to shuttle her and her friends around.
Yeah.
The Corolla probably wouldn't cut it.
Do you drive a Subaru?
No, but it's funny because I spent a lot of time in Idaho, right, in college, and we used to joke that Subaru is like the state car of Idaho.
Yeah, that's how it's saying in Pennsylvania. That's funny. That's hilarious. Let's see. One more question. I guess I've always been interested in like I wanted to get in a little bit to like unilateral strength and like unilateral performance, but I feel like I don't know if you've really seen that. Maybe that's more reserved for a throwing discussion, specific throws based podcast. But that's like another interesting thing with weightlifters and comparing that stuff to like their upper body strength and throwers. That's where it would be interesting to get a group of throwers into your like lab to really break them down.
Well, if U.S. Track and Field is listening, we can make that happen.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe we could you guys should set up a lab in Ramona.
Well, when we were there last year, we took our force plates with us.
Okay.
We thought we would have the time and the capacity to do jump testing or offer that as a sort of service-ish, kind of like they're doing here.
It was also the first time you being there.
Not knowing what we were walking into. And I mean, Caleb Seal was great to work with and letting us set up equipment. But we chose to rather collect data on all 4 throwing events than just the discus.
Yeah.
I mean, which was pretty much the original reason that we went down, right? Because of the text I got from you when I was on spring break with my daughter. It's like, dude, check out the starting list for Ramona. It's insane.
Have you ever sent the stuff of like Uzio to Mexico? The Mexican chapo that was there? Did you get him?
I did. I processed his data and I reached out to him on Instagram, but he has not read my message, I guess.
Okay.
So I reached out for most of the people who we've been able to process data. I tried to reach out to them and say, we were there, we collected data, we have video, multi-perspective, synchronized video, and be happy to share with whoever was there.
Right. Yeah, and he did throw...
he threw like 21?
Yeah, 21:30, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so, how about you said this in the light of throwing, overrated or underrated? Ramona Wind.
Ramona Wind. Appropriately rated.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, it depends on who you talk to, or what the purpose is. I mean, it's. Do you want to have people get excited about throwing far and sort of...
And seeing a discus, and you're like, it's going that far?
Yeah, and I think it was Don Babbitt who actually told me he was there the week before, and he said it was like any other throwing competition where he was at, because people would never really continuously watch the thrower, they would always watch the implement take off.
Yeah.
And I mean, so there's something to be said for building excitement about throwing, right? And so if that helps the sport, then it's probably underrated and everybody should go there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about Jaime's big throw, her 73. And when I remember watching it and being like, that thing's almost flipping over. Oh my gosh. Whoa.
It's flipping over again.
Yeah, like what? That was crazy. And she had felt like that wasn't even her